You should also know that there was a rip-roaring showdown on Capitol Hill today over Republican members of Congress attacking the Justice Department and the FBI, and specifically the Mueller investigation.
We need to see the evidence. If you have evidence of wrongdoing by any member of the Trump campaign, present it to the damn grand jury. If you have evidence that this president acted inappropriately, present it to the American people. There's an old saying that justice delayed is justice denied. I think right now all of us are being denied. Whatever you got, finish it the hell up.
This from the man who kept the Select Committee on Benghazi going for 2.5 years. Kept it going until right after the 2016 presidential election, whereupon he lost interest and quietly wrapped it up. 2.5 years. Trey Gowdy's Benghazi Select Committee, 2.5 years, 0 indictments, 0 guilty pleas, 0 prison sentences, 0 jail time. But he is now demanding that the one-year-old Robert Mueller investigation, which has resulted in lots of indictments and lots of guilty pleas and even some jail time, he's insisting that one has gone on way too long, and that must be, what was he said? It must be finished the hell up. Incidentally, I should also mention that the guy who actually led the real Benghazi attack was sentenced yesterday to 22 years in federal prison. I mention that because you might not otherwise have heard anything about it, because Republicans really turned out to be not all that interested in that at all, unless it could be used to attack Hillary Clinton somehow and try to hurt her chances in the presidential election. But today, for whatever reason, Republicans in Congress really popped the cork on trying to shut down the special counsel's investigation into what Russia did to mess with our last presidential election in order to try to elect Donald Trump. And that included some members of Congress really screaming at the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, who they now apparently want to impeach. And everybody knows what the game is here, right? This is interesting. The top Democrats in Congress, all the Democrats from the Gang of Eight. So Nancy Pelosi, who's the House leader for the Democrats, Chuck Schumer, who's the Senate leader for the Democrats, and the top 2 Democrats on the intelligence committees, Adam Schiff from the House, Mark Warner from the Senate. The 4 of them wrote a letter today to the FBI and the Justice Department expressing their concern about how Republicans in Congress are right now trying to shut down the Mueller investigation. And they released this publicly, I think, basically to sound a public alarm. This letter to the FBI and the Justice Department says, quote, "The president's congressional allies are applying growing pressure on your agencies in line with the president's improper demand for total transparency to disclose sensitive information and material that is not usually shared with Congress and that relates directly to the ongoing investigation into President Trump, his own campaign, and his associates. Given the pending nature of the special counsel's investigation, these persistent and unrelenting document requests are not for legitimate oversight purposes. Rather, time and again, sensitive information shared with Congress has been selectively and misleadingly seeded into the public domain to advance the president and his legal team's strategy of undermining public trust in the Justice Department and the FBI and attacking the legitimacy of the special counsel and his ongoing investigation. As the attacks on the special counsel intensify, it's imperative that you withstand pressure on the Justice Department and the FBI to violate established procedures and norms. Your role in preserving the integrity of the special counsel's investigation and our justice system has become ever more vital." So that's the top Democrats from both houses of Congress, the top Democrats from both intelligence committees, saying to the FBI and the DOJ, we know what the Republicans are trying to do to you here to get to the special counsel's investigation. You must stand up to them and not give in. More vital. What Republicans are doing now at an increasingly frantic pace is demanding information from the Mueller investigation that they can provide to the White House to help the president's defense. They also appear to just be demanding stuff and screaming at the Justice Department and the FBI for the age-old pleasure of working the refs, trying to put the Justice Department and the Special Counsel's Office and the FBI under unbearable pressure to do what Republicans want, which is to, of course, let the investigation go.
Mr. Rosenstein, did you threaten staffers on the House Intelligence Committee? Media reports indicate you did.
Media reports are mistaken.
Sometimes, but this is what they said. Having the nation's #1 law enforcement officer threatened to subpoena your calls and emails is downright chilling. Did you threaten to subpoena their calls and emails?
No, sir, and there's no way to subpoena phone calls.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying. I'm reading what the press said.
I would suggest that you not rely on what the press says, sir.
I don't know why the Republicans in Congress are boiling with such froth right now about the Mueller investigation. But congressional Republicans, they really do appear to be trying to pull out all of the stops all of a sudden right now. I don't know why right now, but something has got them very upset. They passed a resolution today that they really might use to try to impeach the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, not because they have proven any misconduct or even discourtesy on his part. They are after him basically because he is in charge of overseeing the special counsel's investigation, and that is apparently enough. We'll have more on that coming up later on this hour. But I think it's big picture, it's important for everybody to know that for some reason, congressional Republicans right now are running down all paths at once. They are exercising every option they think they've got to try to undercut and undermine and defame and pressure the special counsel's investigation in order to protect the president. Why it is hitting this fever pitch right now, I do not know. But have you met Alexei? Alexei Repik. That's him on the right with Mike Pompeo on the left. This is Alexei Repik angling his selfie just so it's kind of like he's posing with Donald Trump. Here's another photo Mr. Repik posted online, which he says shows him actually shaking hands with Donald Trump. These are all photos from Trump inauguration weekend. Mr. Alexei Repik not only got these photos with Trump and Pompeo, he was also close enough to a lot of inaugural events that he got good shots of Vice President Mike Pence. In this one, he was apparently close enough to be in conversation with Eric Trump, one of the president-elect's sons. Here he is with then White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, soon to be replaced as Chief of Staff by John Kelly, who's now soon to be replaced by who knows who. Alexei Repik. He is a Russian pharmaceutical tycoon. That's him on the right. That's his wife in the center of your screen. Mr. Repik and his wife attended the Trump inauguration. Now, we don't know why this Russian pharmaceutical tycoon's interests might overlap with the Trump inauguration. We don't know why he was there. We don't know who invited Alexei Repik and his wife to come from Russia to attend the Trump inauguration. But we know they attended. And we know that because they posted an immense video library of their inauguration experiences online once they got home.
На входе... Куда?
На входе к мемориалу Линкольна.
Дети Трампа. Иванка, Тиффани Трамп, Дональд Джуниор, Эми и Барон. Ты ушел, я осталась одна с шоколадом. Посмотрите, какие шоколадки нам принесли. Это же просто потрясающе. Это же Капитолий. Это же... Что это? Это здание Mail, почта, которая ныне является гостиницей Трамп. Но это все мы узнаем, конечно же, это Белый дом.
Now, again, we do not know why this Russian pharmaceutical tycoon and his wife attended the Trump inauguration. But we do know that the guy is really connected at home. We know that in part because of this photo of him meeting one-on-one with Vladimir Putin. This is a publicity shot from the Kremlin. You can tell it's a Kremlin publicity shot because these things follow a certain visual pattern. Here, I'll put up another one of these side by side. On the left, there's your pharmaceutical tycoon who inexplicably went to the Trump inauguration. That's him meeting one-on-one with Vladimir Putin. On the right, that's a guy named Boris Titov, also meeting with Vladimir Putin. Boris Titov also attended the Trump inauguration. Vladimir Putin technically had to run for re-election this year. Theoretically, he might have even had some competition in that election. Alexei Navalny is a popular opposition leader in Russia who was very much opposed to Putin. Navalny announced last year he would run against Putin for the presidency of Russia because Navalny was seen as a potential real threat to get even some minor percentage of the national vote. Putin blocked Navalny from running. They drummed up fake corruption charges against him, which technically disqualified Navalny from appearing on the ballot. Navalny nevertheless promised to keep campaigning anyway, and so Russian courts soon ordered Navalny's campaign foundation to shut down as well. It wouldn't allow the real opposition guy to run against him. But Putin still does want to look like technically an elected leader. So what he does now is that whenever he's up for election, he handpicks a few people who he's more comfortable running against. This year, sort of famously, he picked a woman called Ksenia Sobchak, who is seen as the sort of Paris Hilton of Russia. She's a 36-year-old former reality star. She's a relatively famous Russian socialite. She also happens to be the daughter of one of Putin's oldest political colleagues. He picked her to run against him. He also picked this guy, Boris, who is a Russian business advocate, whatever that means. Boris Titov. But this is what democratic elections look like in Russia now. Putin decides who gets to run. Putin decides who does not get to run. That's how Putin decides who wins. And surprise, Putin always wins. Do not congratulate. Agreeing to run as one of Putin's hand-picked stooge fake opponents in these fake elections they have now in Russia, it's a special kind of favor to President Putin. So Boris Titov, one of those candidates in the Russian election this year, here he is, Boris Titov, meeting with Putin one-on-one. Boris was handpicked by Putin to be one of the candidates running against him. Mr. Titov ended up pulling in a robust 0.6% of the vote in the Russian presidential election. It turns out that guy, Boris Titov, also attended the Trump inauguration in January 2017. The Washington Post has reported that he was issued both a ticket to the inauguration and a ticket to one of the inaugural balls. When the Post asked Mr. Titov which inaugural ball he had attended, he told them, quote, "I don't remember what the ball was called, but people danced. Trump danced." When the Post asked him how he got those hard-to-get tickets to an inaugural event, to an inaugural ball, Mr. Titov would not say. So why was that guy at the Trump inauguration as well? There's this pharmaceutical guy who we know has met with Putin directly, he and his wife. Why are you guys at the inauguration? Boris Titov, hand-picked candidate to run against Putin in the last election. Why were you at the inauguration? Washington Post in January had an interesting report on a whole bunch of unexpected Russian figures who inexplicably ended up attending the Trump inauguration. I mean, among the Russian citizens attending Trump's inauguration were Natalia Veselnitskaya, the Russian lawyer from the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting. Veselnitskaya is the one who reportedly offered Russian government dirt on Hillary Clinton to Trump's campaign. Also, with her, the Russian lobbyist who attended the Trump Tower meeting. With her, nice velvet tux, Rinat, right? You clean up very nicely. That's them at a Trump inaugural event. So the Washington Post in January did this first reporting about all these very well-connected Russians, people well-connected to the Russian government who just happened to pop up in D.C. on the day Trump became the most powerful person on the planet. But now today, ABC News has advanced the story because ABC has obtained guest lists from several exclusive, invitation-only formal receptions that were held during the Trump inaugural celebration. Again, this isn't just for going to the inauguration itself, right? The big outdoor event where it rained at the Capitol, right? These are VIP exclusive black tie events that you needed to get invited to and that not all that many people got to attend. Why were there lots of Russian government connected Russian citizens invited to and in attendance at those events? According to the ABC report today, among the people invited to an exclusive 500-person black tie chairman's global dinner the night before the inauguration was a Russian music mogul who had his previous donations to the Republican Party returned because of his ties to the Russian government. But nevertheless, there he was. Another invited guest at a candlelight dinner that was held the night before the inauguration at Washington's Union Station, the train station, was a Kazakh mining mogul who's been hit with European money laundering charges. Also at the candlelight dinner the night before the inauguration at Union Station was a billionaire Russian oligarch who was recently stopped at a New York airport by federal agents working for special counsel Robert Mueller's office. That oligarch is subject to sanctions now by the U.S. government. He's also the same guy who inexplicably put Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, on $1 million contract to do nobody's sure what right after Trump was elected. So we had known before that there were at least a few well-connected Russians who inexplicably turned up at the Trump inauguration. But now this new ABC reporting gives us a whole bunch more names. And it gives us the knowledge that they were invited to not just the inauguration, but exclusive events. And according to ABC News, 3 sources with knowledge of the matter tell ABC News that the presence of all of these well-connected, government-connected Russians at the Trump inauguration has, quote, attracted the interest of federal investigators probing Russian efforts to influence the 2016 presidential election. I wonder if that's unnerving the White House or the president's supporters in Congress. I don't know. I mean, on top of that new news, a federal court in Virginia has also now just unsealed some of the search warrants that were executed against Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort. And those search warrants and the FBI affidavits that go along with them have revealed an additional $10 million loan we hadn't previously known about from a Putin-aligned Russian oligarch named Oleg Deripaska to Paul Manafort. Quote, the 2010 tax returns for a company jointly owned by Paul Manafort and his wife reveals a $10 million loan to the company from a, quote, Russian lender. A court-authorized search in May 2017 of a storage locker in Virginia used by Manafort revealed documents that show that the identity of the Russian lender was Deripaska, misspelled Deripaska. Elsewhere in this FBI affidavit, quote, redacted, also told the FBI that Deripaska helped fund Manafort's Ukrainian work when it began in 2005-2006. Oleg Deripaska is not Ukrainian. He's Russian and very close to Vladimir Putin. And he's only very rich because Vladimir Putin has allowed him to be so. Why would Vladimir Putin and Russia and oligarchs there aligned be funding Paul Manafort for his work in Ukraine? Why was Russia funding Paul Manafort to do that? And what other kind of work did the Russians fund him to do? And did he still owe that $10 million to a Putin-linked Russian oligarch when he started running the Trump campaign and started offering that same oligarch private briefings on the status of the U.S. presidential election while he was running Trump's effort to become president and while Russia was intervening in that effort to help Trump win? I don't know. But we're about to find out, because 1 month from today, the criminal trial of Donald Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, is due to start in federal district court in the Eastern District of Virginia. Paul Manafort late today announced that he's adding yet another new lawyer to his defense team. Special counsel Robert Mueller's office today filed a notice that a veteran espionage prosecutor will be added to the prosecutor's team that will be trying the Manafort case a month from today in Virginia. So again, we don't know how things are going to work out for the president's campaign chairman. We don't know how things are going to work out for the president in the ongoing Robert Mueller investigation. The president today again cited Vladimir Putin's assurances that Russia definitely didn't intervene in our presidential election. Why don't we believe him when he says so? The White House also today confirmed a one-on-one summit between President Trump and Vladimir Putin to take place next month in Helsinki. Hold on to your Alaska. Here at home, the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress, for some reason, are vibrating with excitement, right? They're vibrating with excitement that seems negatively oriented in one way and positively oriented in the other. Positive excitement is over the prospect of the president adding another justice to the Supreme Court. And the country's discussion of that fact has not even really caught up to the possibility that if the president himself is alleged by the special counsel's investigation to have any significant criminal liability in this Russia scandal, that, as a matter of law, will almost inevitably end up as a matter before the United States Supreme Court, to which he is about to name a new member. Can the president pardon himself? It'll be the Supreme Court that ends up answering that, and he's about to put somebody new on that court. But all these things are happening at once now. And for some reason, Republicans in Congress are also, at the same time, really, really fired up and seemingly worried about the Mueller investigation. They are pulling out all the stops right now. They are pushing it to the absolute limit right now to try to kill off the Mueller investigation. Something has got them more wound up on this than they have been in forever. As we said at the beginning of the summer, things are starting to happen fast now. That means we have to be able to pay attention to a whole bunch of different things at once. Your country needs you to. We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.